Good morning, everybody. This is Marco Marinucci with the Mind the Chat, and today we have Gary Coover, General Manager of Samsung Next with us. Hi, Gary.
Morning.
Good morning. How you doing?
Doing great. I'm in my quarantine home office, which is what we used to call bedrooms before this whole thing hit. So I'm doing all right.
Sounds familiar. Is that San Francisco or in the Bay Area?
San Francisco in the Mission District. A good place to be and live when the restaurants are open and bars are open.
Indeed.
Hopefully that day comes soon.
Yeah, tell me about it. Yesterday, actually, I went back to San Francisco after 3 months, and it felt like a surreal in a world that is kind of far in time and space as it is.
It's a different place, and it certainly makes you appreciate every day just how impactful this pandemic is on so many people. So.
Very much so, and today also I want to talk about some of that impact also in your business. But before that, again, we have the pleasure of going deeper, a deep dive with one of the major players in technology in general, and even more so within the ecosystem of Silicon Valley. This talk is in the frame of our activities for the Scale Up Summit Silicon Valley, and also that comes with one of our reports that we publish constantly. This one in particular is about the outpost of innovations in Silicon Valley of some of the major players in different industry, and clearly Samsung is front and center with that. So very excited to spend some time with you and discuss some of the nitty-gritty of how Samsung is being implementing open innovation processes and activities. So maybe to get started, a little bit of your background. You're from the Bay Area, so give us a little bit of your professional path. What took you to Samsung Next?
Sure. So I started, like a lot of people out of undergrad, having no idea what I wanted to do. And those people, a lot of those end up in consulting. Did that for 3 or 4 years, continued having no idea. So I went to business school at Berkeley, another great place to find out what you do want to do. While I was there, I got my first taste of startup life. I co-founded a company called Modify, which sold modular watches online. Basically that business lasted 7 or 8 years, but I was on for an advisor for most of that. And Aaron Schwartz, my co-founder, ran that. And that really kind of got me started, interested in the startup innovation scene. And from that, took a job with Samsung in Korea in an internal consulting group. And that was honestly my first take of what Samsung is all about, and getting an appreciation of just the massive breadth and scale. And so when I was in the consulting arm, I consulted on, it was 3-month projects on anything from real estate asset management for Samsung to construction to heavy industry to chemicals, and then to the businesses that most of us know, the smart TVs and mobile. And then it was so that was the start of 2010. And then 2012, I was fortunate to join David Eun, our mutual friend and contact, who had just joined Samsung. And so I was his second or third hire as we got this thing called what is now Samsung Next off the ground. And so I'll dive much more into what Next is all about. But for me, I think I've been very fortunate to start when we were a few, and now we're a few hundred. As a result, over the last 8 years, I've had roles in driving partnerships on our wearable devices, to getting an accelerator off the ground, and both architecting and launching it, to launching our offices in Tel Aviv and Berlin. And then more recently, getting our platform efforts for our venture arm, which is how we formally support our venture-backed startups. And then the last couple of years, took over the role as GM of Silicon Valley and managing director of our venture team. So it's been a wild journey, but it's been a lot of fun.
It sounds like it. And maybe I would start really from a little bit of an overview of the Samsung Group. We might probably need a book, I'm sure, to get into the nitty-gritty. In particular, if you stop in Korea and South Korea, you can tell really the impact of Samsung everywhere. The impact of actually the country GDP. So it's definitely the size and the sheer size of the different entities under the Samsung umbrella is huge. But why don't you give us a little bit really high level of the composition of the Samsung Group, and then we go straight into the part of the business in the electronic side and Next that is the focus of this chat.
Yeah, I should start by saying, if you can figure out all of the Samsung org structure, you probably have a PhD in something. So it is a very large and complex group. However, we can say roughly about a third of the business is areas that I mentioned, and they're massive businesses, most of which have supply chain management in constant consistency there, where that is one of the kind of the founding DNA of Samsung. And so that's true in that's true in our battery group. That's true in any of our distribution areas, construction. And then there's also areas like life insurance. So there are large businesses that are predominantly in Asia, and that's the kind of 1/3 of the business. The other 2/3 are the part that most of us know, which is what's broadly called Samsung Electronics, which is divided into two parts. There's the component group, and then there's what we call the set group, which is the finished goods. So that would be the mobile phones, tablets, TVs, wearables, etc. And so that's broadly how we think about Samsung, and we're really focused on that last part, which is the finished goods area. That's when we're trying to drive software and service innovation. That's the group we focus on.
Excellent. Now, going closer to our world, let's talk about the footprint of Samsung in Silicon Valley. Let me just start with what we gather. As I said, September 28th, that's the issue of our report on the corporate outpost in Silicon Valley. And I have to say, probably when we were figuring all the different entities of Samsung here is the longest list of all the 400 and plus corporates that we tracked. So let me go through the list, and maybe without going too much details, but you can help us navigate, where they belong to, at least at a high level. Those are just the entities that we track that are part of whose focus is in innovation. So it's not necessarily product development nor distribution of sales. So I'm going to go through the list, and I'm reading the list actually because I will never be able to remember by heart. So SSIC, Samsung Strategic Innovation Center, Samsung Catalyst Fund, Samsung Ventures, Samsung Electro-Mechanics America, Samsung Research America, Samsung SDI America, Storage and Battery, Samsung SDS America Research Center, and then Samsung Next. There is you. So help us, navigate, a little bit of where these structures belong.
Sure. And again, I'm glad to hear we're winning on the longest list of centers here in Silicon Valley. But as I mentioned, almost all of the business I believe that you've mentioned there fall into the electronic side. And so they're either on the component side of the business or they're on the set side of the business. The SDI is an example on the component side of the business. They're doing storage and battery. I think electromechanics as well. The areas that are most similar to Next are Samsung Strategic Innovation Center, SSIC, and the Catalyst Fund. And the primary differences there really has to do with stage and focus. All have investment arms and do earlier stage innovation, but we're the group that's most focused on the finished goods side of the business, and the other two are more focused on the component side of the business. We tend to be earlier stage as well, but what we've seen is our focus has always been software and services, but the impact or the importance of software and services has only increased over time. And as that's increased and taken more of the value and that value stack, that those lines tend to blur a bit more. So we really work in partnership with those groups to make sure that any startup we talk with is having the right conversation, having the right partner that can give them the best experiences.
Yeah, so I'm sure, as you said, that now the lines are more blurred, and with really deep, all the different branches of the companies, there are a few areas that might be in overlap to some extent. So maybe we can, quickly talk about that when we talk about Next, and also, how do you divide today operations that over time have evolved. So let's talk about Next. The definition of Next, what stands within Next, and the history. So when it got started, and really maybe the different phases and what it is today.
Sure. So when David Eun came in, his background, he was a long time, or as you know, he's a long time media exec. So he was with Time Warner, and then Google YouTube, was president of AOL Media. And so had been a long time in technology and media and business development. when he came in, he was an advisor to the CEO, and so it was really up to him to define what next was going to be, what his group was going to be. And when he looked at both, where was the when he talked to all the CEOs of the various businesses in Samsung, it became clear that there was a big opportunity in media, but there was a much bigger opportunity in software and services. And so that's really where we centered on right away. And so in the first year, I think when we were still just about 10 people in 2012, we took an approach that was novel, at least in Samsung and I think many other large corporates, where since we knew we wanted to focus on software and services, we tried to take a customer-centric approach. Is if we're going to go talk to startups around the world, we need to figure out what they want to talk to us about. What is the value prop when they talk to Samsung? And that became really very clear. When startups talk to Samsung, for the most part, they want to talk about distribution on our hardware. They want money, exit opportunities, and increasingly like a closer relationship with Samsung to somehow figure out ways to leverage the tailwinds of this large behemoth. And so we then mapped our 4 pillars of Next to those needs. So we launched a partnership group to help with the distribution, a ventures arm for the funding side, an M&A team driving the exits. And originally we had an accelerator that we've then morphed into a product arm.
Very good. And we're going to talk about the probably also this evolution from the accelerator to the product arm, because we think is relevant also for our audience. Give us some numbers of Next, also the geographical presence. I know that you guys are in different geographies. We met you a number of times I think in Berlin and in Israel, but give us today's picture.
Yeah, so we've got a couple hundred folks around the world. We started out of Korea and still have a team based in Suwon, which is the operating hub of Samsung, just an hour south of Seoul. And then we also have our largest areas in the Bay Area. That was our first kind of outpost outside of Korea. Since then, we launched in New York and then Tel Aviv and Berlin. And through other things like acquisitions, we've had smaller presences in other areas. All of this it's interesting talking about geographies. Those used to feel very important. And now I think with the pandemic and the trends we're starting to see, the geographical lines feel far less important. So while we have contained offices in those areas, and those are certainly hubs that we're invested in, increasingly we're as global as can be.
So before we dive into the different pillars, maybe help us understand what are the macro objectives of Next. I mean, you mentioned it, but more on the measurable side. So when you think it's been a good year, or medium term, what do you think the impact to the company that is related to Next as an objective is in your view?
Mm-hmm. I mean, simply we are here to help transform Samsung from a software and services. And we do that by championing builders and founders around the world. However, we need to be very clear that we are a group of a few hundred in a company of a few hundreds of thousands. And so Samsung is one of the largest R&D spenders every year. And so when we say we're gonna be the ones to transform Samsung, there are many groups inside Samsung that are working to achieve similar ambitions. But certainly for us, I mean, we define success as, can we help steer the broader ship of Samsung? Can we move it a few degrees, ideally every year, closer to the vision of becoming a software and services powerhouse? And so the ways we do that are really through those 4 tools. So when you say, what would midterm success look like? It would be, the examples would be, are there portfolio companies we funded that are driving meaningful collaborations that create new business opportunities? Are there acquisitions that we've led either into Next that we run, or on behalf of Samsung business units? And we can dive into a few of those examples. From a partnerships angle, our partnerships teams works on both partnerships for our own product efforts in Next, as well as on behalf of broader Samsung. So those definitions are really different. Frankly, the scale is significantly different when we're working on behalf of broader Samsung. Those are much larger partnerships. And then the product arm, which is the reason since we formally launched our product arm in 2017, we're building out products that we believe can stand alone, but that can also really help Samsung transform itself to becoming that software powerhouse. We want to leverage the tailwinds of Samsung, really working in partnership with the other business units, but run those companies as their own companies first.
So without going into too much details, but do you guys have your own specific budget that you can, between the different areas that you can move with a certain level of independence, or you need to relate to other parts of the company when it comes also to potential revenue generation?
Sure. I mean, from a budget standpoint, yes. David, and I mentioned he's the one of the president of Samsung. He's also the chief innovation officer, and so he wears both of those hats as part of his role in Samsung. He has our budget for next, and within that, we control our ability to invest or reallocate across whatever groups. The one separate thing is we have a distinct venture fund, the next fund that is not operating expense. It comes out of a fund. So that's the one area that's separate. The rest of the capital, we have the ability to kind of allocate as we see fit across all the different initiatives.
Good. So let's go. You already kind of pre-mentioned the activities of the 4 different pillars, but maybe let's dive a little deeper in each of those, because they do have a different extension. Maybe let's start from the fund. That's probably more, kind of a standalone activities, the focus of the fund, knowing also that Samsung as a group, even just within the electronics, they do have other funds. We talked about a Catalyst, we talked about venture. So maybe differentiating what is the focus of a next fund versus Catalyst and ventures.
Yeah, and for next, you'll hear me say this a lot, but we are uniquely focused on software and services. And I have to say that over and over again, because when people think of Samsung, the first thing they think of is incredible hardware. And so that's really the core focus for next. And so for our ventures arm, we're looking at investments in 4 primary focus areas. That's edge, digital health, media tech, AI, frontier tech. And so those are the right now the 4 focus areas that we're lasered in on, and the areas that when we think about investments, they're primarily earlier stage. Some of them we hope will immediately be able to drive deep collaborations with Samsung, and some of them are more exploratory. So one of the benefits of Next is not necessarily the immediate partnership with Samsung, but being able to place bets on behalf of broader Samsung in areas that we believe are going to be strategic to Samsung in the long term, even if there's not a dedicated strategy already created in the short term.
So positioning is strategic, but also obviously financial. What is the size of the fund? Is that an evergreen or?
$150 million evergreen fund.
Got it. And the early stage, I hear from what you're saying.
Yeah, we're primarily focused, so investments from seed to Series B and sometimes beyond, including follow-ons.
Got it. Does it happen that any of the target that you have, you clearly mentioned software, but is also a potential target of a Catalyst, for example, or venture?
Certainly in the market, and it also depends on different geographies. Some of the geographies we're in similar, some are different. That we might talk to a company, and then they might talk to them later on. We typically are pretty good about trying to sync. Ultimately, the goal we both these groups exist to in a sense make to champion innovation for Samsung. So the only way we do that is by creating the best experience for startups. And so oftentimes our teams will get together and say, okay, well, where is the strategic alignment? Because each of our teams have different relationships with various business units and are driving different theses. And so we try and then figure out, well, how is this startup apply, and where is it the most strategically aligned relative to each of our theses?
Very good. So you talked about partnership, just shifting over the different areas of activities. I think partnership is pretty clear of what you said. Also, I think it's interesting to understand whether once you do some investments on the fund side, does it automatically trigger a partnership manager that is able somewhat to support and leverage the network of Samsung as part of the support of the portfolio companies?
Yeah, the way we operate is that we have our deal leads who will and our investors who will champion the investment and get it fully approved. And at that point, they are then in a sense, the lead for that portfolio company. However, what's unique is that we have our set of resources around the world. So we have a team of 20 plus in Korea that helps us navigate those relationships in headquarters. But Samsung also has subsidiaries nearly everywhere in the world. And so those relationships, we also leverage our folks in Next, sometimes our partnerships team, to help orchestrate those relationships as well. And I think what a lot of startups don't appreciate is that there are many ways to do a collaboration distribution deal with Samsung. Sometimes it can be at the flagship level, but oftentimes it's at the local level. So the team for Samsung in India might be launching some specific service to fit the Indian market, and that makes sense to work with that subsidiary to work on that partnership. Whereas that's not something that comes from the HQ side. So we try and pursue both opportunities on behalf of our startups. And in terms of who is driving that, typically it's the deal lead who's driving the process, but bringing in folks sometimes from our partnership team and oftentimes from our Korea team.
Just to get a sense of also the distribution of resources, you said a couple of hundred people total. How many are fully focused on the fund versus partnership?
On the fund, I think we have 10 plus investors on the fund side. And then on partnerships, the team is, I think it's closer to like 5 or so.
Got it. Okay.
I wear an operations hat. My role is a GM and MD of Ops for ventures. I think all of us have been in Samsung and create those relationships globally. So while somebody might formally wear a title, oftentimes we're leveraging the relationships across Next that exist. And sometimes it's geographically based. Other times it's just, I happen to work on a project with somebody in 2011, and that person is now running whatever team it's in.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually, opens kind of worms there, kind of the tools that you guys use internally also to get a sense of the amount of talent that you have, but maybe that's, a little bit too internal. Let's talk about the M&A side, because I think that's also intriguing. Also the way that, what's really the focus of the M&A team is not necessarily early stage companies that can accelerate some of the product development, or is there anything different there? Last point there, you mentioned that the team of Next also grew through some acquisition. Was it acquisition of other entities that were doing something similar to what Next was doing in terms of extension of products and or geographies, or was something that was more specific on a specific
well, let me dive into that piece. So with our acquisitions team thinks about acquisitions in 2 ways, really. There's acquisitions on behalf of the Samsung Electronics business unit, and then there's acquisitions on behalf of Next as a whole that Next will own and operate afterwards. And so historically, the vast majority we've done are for Samsung business units. Sometimes that comes from us working closely with a business like Digital Appliance, which makes our refrigerators, or the electronic team that makes our TVs, or the mobile team, and they have specific needs. Other times it's us identifying needs or opportunities in the market and going in a sense, selling that opportunity into those business units. And so the majority of the acquisitions we've done over our history actually fall into that category of identifying companies or understanding interest areas for the business units and doing acquisitions on behalf of that. Some of those include SmartThings, which is now the face of consumer IoT for Samsung, AdGear, which is the ad business helped create the ad business for our smart TV team, Joyent, which is the cloud business on behalf of smart TV team as well, or consumer electronics. So these are large businesses that are potentially transformative or add a missing piece into the larger Samsung puzzle. And some of the other acquisitions we've done, the best example is Whisk, which is an acquisition we did, I think, about 1.5 years ago. The team is based in Birmingham, in the UK. They're working on food experiences, and that acquisition is an example where they had a strong B2B product and B2C dreams, and the acquisition by Samsung was really, and by Next, was an opportunity to really accelerate the B2C side of things. And certainly you can see the opportunity when you create food experiences with Samsung, given our footprint in consumer kitchens around the world. And so I think that was the broader vision, where we identified a company that was growing rapidly, but saw that the kind of transformational opportunity with scale with Samsung.
But in this case, for example, with Whisk, the team and the product resides within Next, correct?
Correct. So that is part of what we call a Next product arm.
Got it. And that takes us to the last part of the puzzle. So let's talk about the product, the Next product, more of a, what is a subset of focus. And I think, and most importantly, we're intrigued in understanding what is the process that you guys put in place to decide this is a product that might be, incubated or started within Next, and how do you get an internal buy-in also from the different areas of influence of existing products within Samsung. So guide us through how is the process of definition of this is a product that would fit Next.
Yeah, I think at the highest level, Next, the responsibility of Next is not necessarily to take a need from a business unit in Samsung and go identify those players in the market. It's to identify where the market is going, and then ultimately sell in that opportunity to business units. A lot of times they're headed there already. Other times it takes some convincing to get them there. But that's where we're focused on. So with product, the example of Whisk was, we saw a unique opportunity with food experiences. And I mean, what we've seen from on the pandemic side is that all of us are in our kitchens far more than we ever were. And so the demand for those frictionless food experiences is, far higher than ever before. And so that's one where that was definitely the food experience thing broadly. Is we have a digital appliance team. They sell incredible number of refrigerators and stuff throughout the kitchen. So that was on the radar. When we identified this experience, we felt that both the team, the product, and the business model unlocked something that was a unique opportunity for Samsung and could be operated well out of Next.
So that answer, but the next question is, so those are also, they become revenue generating businesses.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That you tend to maintain within Next. So the medium term vision is that Next will have separate sub teams that would run businesses and products as a separate units.
Yes. Yeah. I think one of the things we can get into is how we made that transition from the accelerator to products. And I think one of the lessons learned from that experience was we want to make sure that when we're building products internally, that we give them the space and opportunity to realize the original vision, so that we don't make the software service kind of beholden to hardware cycles, but we create the best possible experience for the product itself. And so really that's what we're trying to operate with Whisk. We work very closely with the business units in Samsung to make, in a sense, a best on Samsung experience, to make sure that Samsung users have an incredible experience with Whisk. But we also want to make sure and preserve the fact that Whisk is its own team, and we want to make sure that it's able to achieve its broader food vision rather than, let's say, being held back by a specific hardware cycle.
Yeah, and this is a trend that we've been noticing for quite some time, that is becoming more and more spread out, of having arms within the corporates that are able to do venture studios. I mean, they have different names sometimes, yep, right? But I think the focus is very similar, and then maybe the way that is managed internally is slightly different, whether that becomes a separate entity or become a product line within an existing or a separate unit as within Next. And it is interesting to see that is coming as an evolution from the accelerator program and the incubator program, as you just mentioned. I mean, Next, initially when we first crossed paths, there was an incubation, there was an accelerator. And again, this is a process that is ongoing, but I think more of the focus of something that is similar to the product creation. I think is closer to than the KPIs objective of most of corporates. Do you have a specific timeline within the process to decide, whether there's a product market fit, and so there are roadblocks every number of months to decide, okay, this is a product that we can keep evolve and invest, or maybe makes sense to go back to the drawing board? And is there a limit of the number of products that could be incubated or accelerated or started within next products?
Mm-hmm. I should let Travis Bogart, our head of product, speak to that. I mean, that's certainly core to our product team. What I just at a high level, I think those timelines, in a sense, product dependent. And so when we're working on products on that are edge focused versus something that might be more B2C, those are just very, very different businesses, and how you measure traction and the timeline of even customer acquisition are all different. So it is dependent on the product. I think one of the things when we were talking before that's distinct about Next, and frankly a model similar to Next, is that with startups, a lot of times the limiting resource is dollars, and that determines, okay, well, we need to get to market and make sure that this happens in 12 months because that's our runway. And in Next, it becomes much more incumbent because dollars are less of the issue, that you have a distinct process to determine, well, are you achieving product market fit? And there have been products we've spun up and others that we've spun down when we realized that a lot of times it's because while the technology is there, the customer acquisition is not there yet, or the customer adoption is not there. And so similar to a startup, when there's not product market fit after a certain time, you have to look forward and say, well, when would that be? And if the numbers don't line up, then that's something that we ultimately will down.
And how do you staff the different products? I mean, is that internal staffing? I mean, clearly this is an internal origination, or sometimes, as in the case of Whisk, is through an acquisition, and then you grow it internally. But usually, what's the process of staffing different products? Is just as yet a product development team that you're hiring for?
Yeah, I mean, Next product has, and please go on samsungnext.com/careers. We're hiring for a number of roles, but the product team determines the staffing of our various products, and we have 3 or 4 currently that we're building towards. Some of them have shared resources at a functional level, but most are dedicated to specific products.
Got it. Excellent. So, I mean, in the next few minutes, I want to talk about a little bit of your vision and the future. Well, maybe even before the future, the present that you're all living the pandemic, and you talked about clearly the lack of now prioritization of localizations and where things happen and offices. Are there other impacts in terms of the way that you're managing your portfolio and products due to the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, I think first we were talking about a little bit up front, but I think I don't want to understate just how devastating the pandemic has been for so many, and not for people, for industries. It just can't be understated. For Next, we're again focused on software and services, and in our main focus areas, what we've seen is that the pandemic hasn't necessarily accelerated innovation on the technology side, but it's accelerated customer adoption. So when we think of our 4 focus areas for ventures, media tech, healthcare, edge, and AI, frontier tech, all of those have verticals in there that have been very positively impacted by the pandemic, and therefore the reaction to adopt these services. So while I'd say the pace of innovation has stayed similar, the appetite for experimentation has increased drastically. And when you're investing in early stage technology, the biggest risk is when you're trying to forecast the window of customer adoption. I think we've seen with many industries like VR, where maybe the tech is there, maybe it's not, but when will the consumer adopt it? And take media tech as an example. I think in-home entertainment, as if for those who have kids, we've all seen, and those as adults as well. Like in-home entertainment, the adoption is through the roof, and that includes gaming, hyper-personalized experiences, synthetic media. All of these things that might have felt more peripheral, experimental, are now are gaining far more adoption. Similarly, in healthcare, healthcare is traditionally a much older industry, and telehealth has been around forever, or for a long, long time. But certainly, COVID has accelerated the adoption of telehealth and services around that. As a result, we saw, I think, 5.4 billion in health startup funding in H1. So we're seeing those trends, and I think investors and startups are facing that as well.
I'm sorry, do you have some portfolio companies in digital health as next?
One I would mention is Day 2, which creates food recs customized to your microbiome. So it's a fascinating company that really takes a data-driven approach to what you should be eating. All of these services also work with payers and hospitals and try and get adoption. And for the most part, it's been adoption has increased because, frankly, it has to. The amount of face-to-face experiences are very limited. So there's far more willingness to work with companies like
that. Lastly, to some extent also related to some of the macro trends that you just mentioned, but are there specific areas and tech areas where you guys and you particularly feel pretty bullish about for the future?
Yeah, I'm on the ops side, right? So I get to look across all these areas. I don't specialize in any one, but I tend to be most passionate about business model innovation. And I think companies that we've funded that are exciting one is Grover, which does hardware as a service. And so they're trying to change the way that we, as consumers, typically we would go and we would purchase a phone or a TV or whatever it might be. They're putting that on a subscription plan, which is an innovative way to kind of flip the traditional product acquisition on its head. Similarly, Forte is a gaming company using blockchain to change the business model for gamers and developers. And blockchain, again, we've seen the crazy rise and fall, but I always like it when you can use a technology to change the way that the business model works, because then that's where you can see pretty interesting disruption. So I think this is another area where there's a lot more experimentation happening on the business model side, given the now significant increase in adoption across all these areas.
Excellent. Very last question here, going back to also our context of the Scale Up Summit that we have, but also beyond. So we're creating a marketplace with interesting startups to integrate within corporates, whether that's through integration, investments, acquisition. What does it take to be a good fit for Samsung? To be noticeable as a founder out there that has an interesting technology that could, among the ones that you just mentioned, but the noise out there is so high that what does it take to be noticeable by you guys?
Yeah, I think first and foremost is appreciating the scale of Samsung, and so as a result, big ideas only. And maybe that sounds trite, but we're really looking at startups who are trying to change the world or change the way users adopt products in some way. And so we're looking less for features and more for things that can change an entire industry. So thinking, we want to talk to the founders and startups that are thinking really big, as opposed to like more the incremental change. Second is, I would think, is to be really thoughtful about how you can leverage Samsung scale in a mutually value-adding way. And so I think oftentimes it's easy for a startup to say, oh, well, if I was on every phone that Samsung had, that would be a great experience. But what is unique about the Samsung positioning? Rather than just as a distribution partner, is there a service that Samsung's creating? Is there an opportunity that you see that makes Samsung specifically the unique partner. So I think thinking through that ahead of time and coming with a few ideas, that certainly helps move the conversation forward. And lastly, I'd say talk to it early. And that's somewhat counterintuitive, but it's the reason we're probably having this discussion. It's the reason we're in Silicon Valley and all these startups hubs around the world, is that while Samsung is a massive company, and the companies that are getting global distribution tend to be mid-stage, later stage, are rarely the seed stage companies. But it's often when we establish those relationships at seed and A that we get to work with a company, whether we venture back it or we just work on a partnership together, whatever it might be. It's those companies that we then can work together over that time to find the really big opportunities together. So I would say, even if you're pre-revenue, come talk to us at Samsung Next, and let's see how we can work together. And it might be, maybe the first step is an investment from our Next Ventures fund. But even if it's not a fit today, talk to us now, and we can always, dive back in and see if there's areas to collaborate later on.
Very good. And as you mentioned, really, geography doesn't really matter, wherever, if they're, fitting all the criteria that you just mentioned. And I think the first big step would be, and is, to understand, how to get oriented within the different areas of Samsung, and hopefully this chat helped in getting oriented. So Gary, thanks a lot. Appreciated your time, and hopefully we meet pretty soon, and stay safe.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate it.